Alright guys, today we're going to shoot a video on vendor buying. Recommendations I have for vendor buying. Recommendations I have on like what to buy, what percentages to buy at. We would try to focus this video mostly on how much you should be buying per card. So I brought a few examples. Like, I know we're focusing a lot on modern, but that's what the majority of new vendors are going to be carrying. So I brought a few slabs in, brought a few raw cards in. And we're going to be talking not as a collector, not as a hobbyist. We're going to be talking about this as like as a vendor and somebody that wants to make an income. And what we're going to look is we're just going to look at charts for a couple months, and we're going to look at, you know, what a good percentage is to buy. And I always tell everybody, like anybody that's new in our mentor program or working with us or buying from us, like as a vendor at a show, a pretty safe percentage to buy at, and the top I would be buying at would probably be 70% of market. Now, sometimes finding out what actually market is can be the issue, because somebody will go off a high comp, somebody will go off a low comp, somebody will go off one website, somebody will go off the median. So generally what I recommend is find your comp first and then, you know, talk about what you're going to pay. Now, we're going to look at cards as a whole. So we're going to look at not what they're worth today. So any card we look at, we're just going to scroll back and say if you made a purchase about 2 months ago. So to start, we can look at something cool like Eevee. So if you're vending at a great show, you came in, a person walked up to you 2 months ago and they said, I want to buy Eevee. And you came over into your app, you typed Eevee in, you came down. So now we're going to say January, right? So if we click on January, you know, January the market was high, so Eevee was $129. So someone came up to you and they said, I want to sell you the Eevee. It's we'll just round it to $130 just to make it simplistic. So someone wanted to buy Eevee, and then someone said, hey, buy my Pikachu. So let's take a look at what Pikachu was too. Pikachu. So if we look at that 6-month chart and we go back to January, let's pick it on one of the dip days. So let's say it's a little lower. So $627. So $627. So if someone, just to make life simple right now, if someone walked up, you know, mid-January and they said, do you want to buy these 2 cards? And you said, yes, I'll take them. And the comps on them were 627 and 130. So 627 plus 130. So these 2 cards were $757. So that's 2 months ago. Call it 2.5 months ago. So my recommendation is if someone wants to pay cash, your general percentage should always be 70. So you buy them at $530 cash. Now, you know, if they don't want to take 70%, you know, that's up to them completely. Cards vary a lot in price point, especially new sets such as Surging Sparks can kind of go up and down because it is one of the newer sets. Twilight Masquerade might be out a little longer. It might not come as much down. So my recommendation is for basic buying, modern buying, not vintage, 70% is where you want to be at. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that disagree, and people say, you know, 80% for premium cards and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And this is why I say, if you're talking as a vendor that wants to make money or do this as a job, or if you're talking as a collector or a hobbyist, right? So my recommendation is if you want to do this for fun, go in and buy whatever percent you want. You want to buy it 100%, 90%, 80%. Do anything you want, but like as someone that wants to treat it like more of like a job and to actually make money, to build inventory, 70% is kind of where I push it. Now, let's say that you average, because you're a brand new vendor, you average like 1 or 2 shows a month. Let's say 1, because not a lot of new vendors jump in, right? So in January at that show, you buy those 2 cards, you pay $530. Now in February, you have a show. In March, you have a show. In April, you have a show. And then that's pretty much where we are now, end of April. So you have 3 shows to sell those 2 cards. So let's say you bought those cards, they agreed to it, you paid $530, And let's go to the Pikachu. So if we look at February, so January, February, the card was up a little bit. So if you sold it in February, it was at like $6.40. So you're up about $12. If you sold it in March, mid-March, it was like $6.10. So you're down about $17. And then if you sold it in April, you're at $4.70. So you're down about $160. So now if we go back to this Eevee card and we pull her up and we look at the last 6 months and we do the same thing. So in February, we spiked a little bit. So let's go mid-February, you actually would have been up $3, so $133. Then March, you would have been around 107, so you would have been down about $23. And then April, you would have been around $90, so you would have been down about $40. So just an example, if you bought these cards at 70% and you were able to sell them within the same month, you would have been able to make your 30% plus a couple extra dollars. Now, we all know that as a vendor, it's very hard to sell cards at retail price because, you know, most customers want a deal or a package or put 2 or 3 cards together. So, you know, it's generally not likely that you're going to sell at 100% of market. Now, if you had one show in February, and just remember when I try to explain to everybody that if you go to a show with 10K in inventory, a really great show, you sell 5%. And like an amazing show, I would say you sell up to 10% of your inventory. So if you do one show in February and you don't sell these 2 cards, and let's say March comes. So now March comes, you've paid 70%. Now your cards went from being worth, you know, $6.30 and $1.30 to being worth $6.10 and $1.07. So, you know, you've dropped a little bit in money, but you have that buffer because you paid $5.30 for them, right? You paid that 70% margin. Now, you know, we all know that there's cards that sit in displays. The reason why I chose this card is because it's been sitting on my display for a while and I haven't been able to sell it. And this card I just have multiples of, so it's like a little harder to sell. Now, let's say that, you know, March comes and you can't sell it because we already know that we're only selling 5 to 10% of our inventory per show. You know, there are shows that you might even sell less. And, you know, 10% of your inventory, if you have 10 grand and you're selling 1K, you know, that's a decent show. You know, if you have $1 million in inventory and you sell 10%, it's 100 grand, right? So everything is based on what you have. So let's, you know, pretend that we go into April. So just 2 months before that, we bought these cards for $530. We've now watched the market dip to $470 from $630. And we've watched the market dip on this one from $130 to $90. So we initially paid 2-3 months ago for these cards $530. Now today they're worth $470 plus $90, so we're like $560. So if we sell these now, our margin went from 2 months ago being 30% plus to probably being like 3%. So the reason why I say like a good percentage to be buying cards at is 70 is because it leaves you a bit of a buffer. Now, if we had to do something as simple as when the person came in, if we had to give them 80%, so I'll just show you quickly. So the original card was 627 plus 130. So if we had to say, here's 80%, our cost was 605. Today, the cards are worth 560. So you're losing, you're going to be in a negative $45, which means you pay to go to a show, you're at the show. If you sell these cards at full market today, you're losing $45. If you give a 10% discount, maybe you're losing $85. So this is why when we're buying cards at shows, you know, sometimes you got to get over the excitement of, you know, there's so many great cards in front of me, I need these and I want these, and you have to treat it almost, you know, more like a business, right? Now, being if you're like a collector or a hobbyist, you know, if you lose $40, it doesn't make all that difference. But if you're doing this to make some extra money and, you know, The cost of a table at a show is not free. The gas to get there is not free. Your time to get there is not free. So 70% is generally the max I would be offering on premium cards. I would say like over $50. Now the reason being, if I can just put something behind that, right? So let's say that, you know, you're a collector that's working Monday to Friday. So your Saturdays or Sundays are your days off. You want to go to a show. Let's say this weekend we have 2 shows. We're in HobbyCon in London on Saturday. Let's say that you go to HobbyCon and you got 1 table. It's $100. Let's say that you drove to London. You live an hour away. It's $50. Let's say that you had to eat fast food when you went out. I know you don't have to take this into account, but let's say like, you know, $20 for breakfast, $20 after, $40. Now, let's forget your time. Your time is free. You're at $190 to do a show. Now, let's say that you're a brand new beginner and you have a good amount of inventory. So let's say that you have $10,000 in inventory. Now, from my experience of doing this for a long, long time, an amazing show you sell 10%. Okay shows you sell 1%, 2%, 5%. 5% is usually pretty average. So if we say that you have the most amazing show and you actually have 10K in inventory, so you've actually sold of your $10,000 in inventory, $1,000. Now, just because you sold $1,000 doesn't mean you made $1,000. So let's say that, you know, you bought your inventory at 70% and you sold $1,000 worth. Let's say that you gave no deals, no cards went down, so your total for the day in profit is $300. So $300, and then if we minus our cost of table, our cost of gas, you know, let's forget food for now. Let's not make it complicated. Just the cost of gas in the table, not your time, not your food. So what you've done in selling $1,000 cards for the day is $150. Now, if we switch this up and we say, hey, you know what? I want to be competitive and I want to be a competitive vendor and I'm going to offer way more than other people. So I'm going to offer 85%. So we do the same calculation on $10,000. You sold 10% of your inventory for the day. So your sales for the day are 1K. Now, you didn't give any discounts. You didn't give any deals. You sold everything at market price. So your margin for the day is going to be 15%. So on $1,000, you're going to walk away with $150. Now, we know the table cost was $100, and we know the gas was $50. So the difference between 85% and 70% is the difference of you going out to a show for a day and coming home with no money. Now, you know, I'm not saying you go out and you offer people 10% of the market, but you just have to be aware that not everything is going to sell. Cards do sit. And, you know, in your first shows, if you have, you know, $1 million in inventory, obviously it's a different ball game. You can buy things a little more, buy things a little less. You can do some trades. So my suggestion to anybody is buying modern cards, buying modern slabs, which we already know slabs sell a little bit lower. Like this right here is the absolute maximum that you want to buy at. Now, if we said, let's switch it up. You've done 10 shows. You've done a substantial amount of trading. You know, you've got your inventory up to $20,000. And we already know that in a show, you can sell generally between 5 to 10%. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't sell 30% or 50%. Also doesn't mean that you make no sales. But this is generally from years and years of doing it, we're in this ballpark. So let's say that you bought at 70%. You have $20,000 in inventory. You have a fantastic day. You do 10% of your sales. So you've sold $2,000. So now $2,000 at 70%, you know, no deals given, you've now made $600. So minus your gas, minus your expense of your table, you have a $450 profit, for a show that was open for 4 hours or 5 hours. So vending and buying in Pokemon can be very lucrative. There can be a lot of money in it, but you have to look at it as a bigger picture. So like as a brand new vendor, you want to make sure, and 70%, some people may say it's low. There's a lot of people out there going to say it's high. So if you look at any reputable store, I won't name the stores in KW, Toronto, Mississauga, most places are paying cash 50% or under. Now, that is also because they have a storefront, they have employees, they have costs, so that's why their percentages are lower. Some stores are actually lower than this. Some people only offer 50%, non-converted TCG. So, now that you're out making money at a show and you're paying to go there and it's your time, this is when you have to start saying that, like, you know what, like, this is why now trades can't be even anymore. It's your time. You're not out at shows just for fun. You're out at shows to make money. So, trades have to be done at a percentage. Buying has to be done at a percentage. And then some of the bigger questions are like, would I spend 70% on cards that are under $5? So that's a totally different ball game. So like if you want to buy cards that are, under $10, I don't think 70% is kind of where you want to be, because they are cards that do take a lot longer to sell. So I would generally say 70% is a good number if you're picking up cards, $50, $80, $100, $500, $200. If you're picking up cards that are slightly cheaper, preferences to you. It just, the lower you can pick it up, the better, because it is sitting in your inventory. And just remember that the majority of guys that are bringing these kind of cards into you, for example, they may have bought this for, $490. They graded it. Now it's worth $1,200. So their margin is a lot higher. They may have opened this in a pack. They may have bought this on the marketplace for 50%. So like, just remember that, like, value your time, value your money, and value yourself, right? So what we don't want to see people doing is making absolutely no money, investing tens of thousands of dollars going to shows and vending, and 6 months later being like, you know what, like, I actually haven't made any money yet. So that's why I think my recommendation is to be in this ballpark. Now, you are going to have people that are going to say, oh no, sorry, it's too low. You're going to have customers that walk up to you and say, oh, 85% is the lowest I sell at. And you know what? Like, if you think that you can buy it at 85% and you can flip it right away, or you have a buyer right away, do what you do. There are people out there that pay very, very high. I just recommend against it. So that's my bit of advice for buying cards generally over $50 modern. I'm not going to get into retro or mid-era, because then we have to talk about conditions. And once we start talking about conditions, the worse the condition, the lower you want to pay. Conditional cards like that are, heavy played, they're going to take longer to sell. And then there's exceptions of cards that, even heavily played sell fast, like gold stars and higher end first editions. So that's like a whole other topic. So right now we're just trying to hit the modern pricing, modern vending, and that's my recommendation. So if you guys have a bunch of comments or whatever, just send them through, hit me up, let me know. Thanks, guys.